Hello and welcome to another edition of the MilVet Podcast. I'm your host, Beau Higgins. Great to be here today for another episode. For those that may not be familiar with the MilVet, we provide services for veterans looking to get executive roles in the private equity venture capital space, but we also try to talk to interesting guests about their transition, their stories, and just get the word out about veterans to the veteran community. And today I have the privilege to be connected with Wayne Phelps that'll tell his story of transition and what he's doing these days and hopefully provides insights to our audience. So Wayne, over for you for a short intro.
Well, thanks, Beau. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I was a 20-year Marine Corps officer, came in December of 98, or Delta 98 was my TBS class, and then I was an air defense officer by trade initially, so a 7204 low altitude air defense officer. Spent most of my time out at 3rd LAAD Battalion in Camp Pendleton. Deployed, multiple times from there in support of Operation Enduring Freedom and Iraqi Freedom. We can get into more of those if you'd like. And then I went up to the Pentagon when I was a major to become a ground-based air defense requirements officer in the aviation hallway. And I ended up moving over to work on UAS requirements, so requirements for the drones for the Marine Corps, and I kind of fell in love with that community. And they had opened it up for transition, conversion, and put my name in the hat, and did a conversion board. So went through the Air Force's remotely piloted aircraft training program as a Lieutenant Colonel Select, which was also interesting, and then went out to the fleet as a newly minted UAS pilot. And then spent 4 years out there in Hawaii at VMU-3. And, much like you, I handed the flag off at the end of my change of command and retired on the same day. So it was about 7 years ago. I retired here in Austin, Texas, and been working in counter UAS and UAS, both commercial and defense industry, with a brief period in the space industry for about 3 years. But yeah, happy to be with you today.
No, it's great. Great to be connected for sure. And I'd love to just kind of back it up to the beginning of it all. I mean, what was the impetus for you to join the military? Were you one of those kids that always knew they wanted to be a Marine? Did it hit you later in life? What was kind of the push or the motivation to get in to join the Marine Corps?
Yeah, interestingly enough, I was in college at the time where I met a Marine officer recruiter, one of those job fairs. I think I was a sophomore in college and kind of lacked direction and didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And I met this, officer recruiter, and he said, have you thought about officer candidate school? And up to that point, I hadn't really thought about it, but he said, there's, it's 2 summers, super easy, no commitment beyond that. Of course, like all good recruiters, So I went to OCS the summer of my sophomore year and, fell in love with the Marine Corps and decided that I was going to at least join and do 4 years and see if I liked it. And, would make a decision after my first tour was up. So, that's what got me in.
No, it sounds familiar. I literally, my senior year of college, I'm at Virginia, and I saw the recruiter by the library and didn't know what I wanted to do. And I was a senior, so I was getting ready to graduate, and I saw him there, and he's like, yeah, have you heard of this OCS thing? I'm like, not really, but I got nothing else going on right now. The stock market just tanked, and I don't want to go back to school. So I'm like, I'll join up for 4 years and get my time, go back and get my MBA. And 25 years later, that's how it works. It's kind of funny, So literally the same kind of story. That's really funny. And so obviously joined the Marine Corps out of college. Thought you'd do only a handful of years. Was the MOS? I mean, I think they phased that MOS out eventually, didn't they? Was that when you were in? I feel like some of the LAAD or air defense stuff I know it's gotten changed over the last few years, but how did that work for you as far as your career? Obviously you pivoted later to UAVs and kind of got ahead of kind of the next wave, but I know it's probably an interesting, career to have. I feel like it was on the way out at some point in time, or maybe did go on the way out.
Yeah, I spent probably the majority of my career really just fighting for missions and, fighting for relevance. We were in a period of time where the Marine Corps was downsizing. just about every air defense asset within the service. We lost Hawk. There was, 2 full active battalions and a Stinger battery in Okinawa, and they just started reducing force structure and just kept shrinking us down. And then they combined our MOS for officers with the Direct Air Support Center, so the DASC. So we went to both, schools for a while. And it was pretty competitive to get promoted at the time because there was not that many billets available for officers. I was fortunate enough to do pretty well in the community and stay within it and continue to get promoted. But, it wasn't until probably around 2015, 2016 when they started thinking about additions to force structure. And now you're starting to see, they've added additional battalions and they plussed the battalions up, and the UAS threat is real now, right? So it's the Marine Corps is growing to address it. So it's good to see.
Yeah, definitely. Because again, I think it was one of those things that was almost, well, it's morphed dramatically. Obviously, the threat. I mean, as an intel guy, certainly it's something you talked about. But the big air, SAMs, and threat was different back then. Now with UAS systems, it's a whole new ballgame out there. So interesting, I think, to be on the front end of that and be going through and commanding a UAS squadron. It's pretty cool. I mean, what was that? What was that like? I mean, did you have the cool toys in the squadron? Kind of at the early stage, I feel like you probably had the antiquated stuff. I'm just curious, what was it like at that point in time?
Yeah, when we flew the RQ-7 Shadows, so it was a hand-me-down from the Army, and we were the last squadron to transition into the RQ-21 Blackjack. So we were flying the old Legacy platform, and it was interesting. It was a pretty good, system, had its limitations, but we made the most of it. And when I was the commanding officer of EMU-3, we ended up deploying 4 detachments overseas to fight, violent extremist organizations, and had great success using this system. So, the squadron life was definitely different than being part of a battalion. There's a lot more officers, for one, right? So you have officers that are doing different collateral duties as their ground job, and every officer is expected to be proficient at their main responsibility of flying and employing their weapon system. But then you also have squadron life, which is the ready room life and things like that. And there's a lot of practical jokes that go on. And I remember when I was the operations officer, I came in one day and the lieutenants over the weekend had gift wrapped everything at my desk, everything: scissors, paper, my desk, stapler. It took me an hour just to tear down all of the gift wrapping. And that wasn't even the worst of it. The next week they got my assistant operations officer. He came in the morning, and there was chicken wire around his desk, and there was newspaper on the floor, and there was 4 baby chicks just running around his desk. and to make it worse, he was on the rifle range that day, and he didn't show up until about noon. And the other 3 of us in the office just let the chicks just kind of roam free until he got there. So, it was a lot of fun. I really miss that part of being a Marine. So.
Yeah, I was always jealous of the air wing guys. They seem to have a lot more fun, especially on the MEU deployments. Their ready room was a good place to be. As the intel guy, I was always trying to find reasons to hang out with those guys. But yeah, anything that stands out to you? Those are some good stories of your time. Any leaders that stood out? Any missions you did that stood out during your time in the Marine Corps?
Yeah, so I did multiple combat deployments. I was on the 15th MEU in 2001. So we deployed August 13th, 2001. So a few weeks before 9/11.
I was there with you. I was your 2.
That's right. And we were, as you know, we were in Darwin.
Yeah.
On 9/11, and then we got orders to go right off the coast of Pakistan. In early October, right before the war kicked off. I remember when we went ashore, General Waldhauser, then Colonel Waldhauser, the MEU commander, he was sending me into Pakistan to set up a forward arming and refueling point. so we could leapfrog all of the Siege 46s and the skids all the way into Afghanistan when we took Objective Rhino. And he met me at the ramp before I got on the helicopter, and he's like, "Lieutenant Phelps, is there anything you need?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know, but you can always ask for more ammo." So I said, "We could use more ammo, sir." And he turns to his logo and he's like, "Get him more ammo." So logo comes back with like 4 more cases of 5.56 and 7.62, and he hands it to me and he goes, "Anything else, Phelps?" And I was like, "I'm good. I guess we're good, sir." General Waldhauser was, he was an amazing leader. I really enjoyed working for him. That night of 9/11 in Australia, when we got back to the ship, and we all got recalled, swept through the town of Darwin and pulled everyone back to the ship. I got back to my stateroom, and there was a message on the door that said, the MEU commander would like to speak with you. And I'm just a lieutenant at the time. So I get in there and I'm just curious, what does the colonel need to speak with me about? And I go in there and there's the MEU OPSO, the JAG, and, the MEU commander. And he said, "Hey, Lieutenant Phelps, we'd like for you to, break out the live stingers and go up on the flight deck and defend the ship, because we don't know, we're here in port. We don't know if there's a threat, things like that." And I said, "Sir, I think that's a bad idea for a few reasons. Like, one, what's the what is the ROE? How do I determine a civilian airliner is a threat, and how do we shoot it down?" I said, "Two, what's the international relations with the Australians if we shoot down a commercial airliner in their airspace?" And then I said, "Three, we've been on Liberty all day, and it's going to be really hard to find a sober Stinger gunner at this time of day." And the MEU commander was like, "You should have led with that one, Phelps." Yeah, I mean, he was just a phenomenal leader. And, I was blessed to have just really great staff NCOs and commanding officers, pretty much throughout my entire career. Lots of mentors that really took me under their wing. When I was a squadron commander, Colonel Cut Patton was my MAG commander, and he was phenomenal. I couldn't ask for a better MAG CO. So I was really blessed the entire time I was there.
No, that's awesome. That's some great memories of 15th MEU for sure, and being there in Darwin. I had been out playing rugby that day, and that's when we were in the bar celebrating after when the towers got hit, and then we had to stop in East Timor on the way. You may recall,
Yeah, that's right.
over to Afghanistan. It's funny.
Yeah.
And I got to have General Waldhauser as my. He was the division CG when I had 1st Recon Battalion. So, yeah, great guy for sure. One of the guys that I certainly still stay in touch with. But funny, small world, small Marine Corps. But moving forward, I mean, when you obviously figured out at some point, and I always say, like you, my 06 command, changed command in the morning, retired in the afternoon. When you know, and somehow I can't. It's hard. People ask me all the time. I talk to a lot of folks that are still in active duty. Like, well, how do you? I mean, I can't explain it. When you know, like just something will happen or something will change. It could be family, could be, personal, could be just professional. But when you know. And I certainly knew. I mean, was there something in particular that pushed you to decide you wanted to get out, or what was kind of and then just really kind of go into your transition process?
Sure. Yeah. I don't know if it was a mistake or not, but I made the decision that my family would get the 51% vote when we got to 20 years, whether we stayed in the Marine Corps or not. And I loved the Marines. I loved the Marine Corps. I loved what I was doing. I had a successful command tour. I was, I felt like I was a shoe-in for top-level school. But I got a year out, and I asked my family, "What do you want to do?" And it, within a second, they all said, "We're done. We're ready. We're ready to plant some roots and be done with this, nomadic lifestyle." Because my kids had moved around so many times, and I think my wife moved 11 times in our marriage. They were, they'd sacrificed a lot, and my son was getting ready to go into high school, and just for stability reasons, I thought it was the right time for me to leave. I'd still be in if it wasn't for that decision. Yeah,
Fair
and
enough. And how did you approach transition? I mean, obviously did you know where you wanted to go, what you want to do, what was your process? Obviously, being in command, I did the same thing. It's not the greatest to transition out of command because you're working. I was deployed almost like till 3 or 4 months before I got out. So my transition is not the model. Curious how you were able to balance that or juggle that or what your transition looked like.
yeah, I would say if there was a wrong way to transition out of the service, I would be like example number one. Um, I didn't even think about it until till after I had handed off the guidon and said, okay, what's next, right? The only thing that we had thought about was where do we want to live. So we made you can move to where there's a job or you can move to where you want to live and look for work. I decided to move where we wanted to live and that I would try to find work from there. So we had built a home here in Austin. It was near complete or would be complete by the time we moved here. And then I would start looking for work. And at the same time, I started, doing research for a book as well. So I had grand aspirations that I wanted to write full time, and that was, going to pay the bills, and I was going to, work for myself for the rest of my life. And it turns out that's really hard to do as a new author. So we ended up moving here. I found work, in the UAS industry, working for a land surveying firm that had a drone program, and they needed someone to run it. It seemed pretty easy. It was kind of like being an operations officer of a squadron. I assigned resources to requirements, manage their training schedule, manage the execution of programs and projects, and that was pretty easy. I did that for a couple of years, which gave me plenty of time to research and write a book as well. So.
Got it. Was that that wasn't necessarily a defense tech industry per se. I mean, it's related. It's drone tech. It's tech, not necessarily defense side of tech. But was it a startup? Was it in the private equity side of the house? Did you touch that space at all? Because you had several different roles.
I did,
The
yeah.
last few years, yeah.
The first job was with a well-established company. Had been in business 25 years. It wasn't a startup by any means. It was a profitable company, 1,000 employees, 30 offices throughout the U.S., and it was all commercially focused. So we did, work for Department of Transportation and things like that. I was there 2.5 years, and I realized I really missed being connected to the defense industry. So
Mm-hmm.
I had an opportunity to go work for a startup out of Utah that was doing counter UAS. So they were building a drone that was almost fully autonomous that could detect and shoot down other drones with a net. And I thought that was pretty interesting. So I ended up that was my first foray into a startup. So I went there and spent about a year doing business development stuff for them. So.
Yeah, what did you think of the difference? I mean, certainly different cultures. I talk about culture of a company for people that are transitioning and how important that is to be successful somewhere. I assume they were quite different being from the big to the small.
Yeah, it was definitely different. Really small company. You kind of know everybody. Everything that the company's working on, all the different programs and projects, and you wear many hats as well, right? You might be hired to do one job, but you're doing multiple different things. You just kind of do whatever needs to get done. And I really experienced that when I left that company and went to another startup here in Austin that's in the space industry. So I knew absolutely nothing about the space industry or about phased array communication systems. Super steep learning curve. The company was, I don't know, 4 or 5 years in existence at the time, and one of my neighbors, retired Marine colonel, said, "Hey, we need, we're growing our BD team. Would you like to come work for me?" And I said, "Yeah, it sounds interesting. Let's do it." Um, so I ended up doing that. And when I joined that company, they were about 80 folks, and doing single digit millions in revenue. And by the time I left, there were about 300 folks, and had gone through a Series B plus round of funding. They'd raised over 200 or 300 million, and we had 10x our bookings. We're making booking over 100 million, and in sales. So it was significant growth. It was a lot of fun. It was hard work, and I learned so much from supply chain to trade compliance to inside sales to sales operations. I mean, it was a great learning experience.
That's awesome. No, and that's the thing. It's the beauty of the smaller companies that you have to be a jack of all trades, right? You have to be to learn it all because there's no one else to go to figure it out. But it's great that you were able to have that and see that on that side of the house, and then have that experience. Now you can take whatever you wanted to go from there. So yeah,
Yeah,
good
but,
stuff.
I think veterans do really well at that too because we're used to getting mission type orders and figuring out how to do things, how to accomplish an end state, rather than being told exactly what needs to happen and how to do it. So I was comfortable in operating in chaos and friction, and it didn't scare me away, and I actually enjoyed it more. It's like, all right, we'll figure out how to make it happen. So
Yeah, that's
I
awesome.
think that's definitely something that vets bring to the table. One of those intangible skills.
That's certainly our pitch at the MilVet, right? I mean, we're trying to place veterans into exec roles, into the VCPE space, right? Our belief is that, if you have a guy that got out after, especially, junior officer gets out after 5, 8 years, goes back, gets his MBA, has some experience in the corporate world. But if you can combine, the ability to read a P&L with the MBA and be a veteran that's used to operating with more with less in that fast-paced environment, that's a candidate that will be successful in those type of companies, right? That's kind of the whole premise of what we're doing. And you actually, I mean, you lived it out, not, it's just kind of, it proves the point that combination of skill sets is going to make you successful, I think, in that, PE kind of space, in that small startup kind of space. Pretty cool.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah.
And obviously, you mentioned it a little bit, but you were did write a book. I mean, so you were doing that always. Like, is that always kind of in the background of, as you transitioned and couldn't become the primary thing, at least obviously not initially. But how did that kind of, come all together?
Well, I was going through the transition seminar. It was like the seminar, so it's senior officers, senior staff NCOs, and they ask if you could do anything, what would you do? And I hadn't put any thought to that, and that's when I knew I wasn't really ready to transition. Um, so I said, well, I enjoy writing. And I enjoy writing, humor. So I think I would write smart ass comments and have someone pay me for it. And, and the woman leading the seminar said, that's not actually a job.
Yeah.
So what do you want to do? And I said, well, I'd like to be an author. I think, I've got some good stories to tell. I would love to, write what I know. Um, and she said, okay, mature that a little bit. And I went home and I thought about it, came up with a title of a book. I came up with a thesis for what I would study, what I would write about. And then I pitched the idea to retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. So he's the author of, On Killing, On Combat, many of those books. And it was a cold pitch. I reached out to him on LinkedIn and said, I'd love to take your book On Killing and extend it and look at it through the lens of remote warfare.
Hmm.
And so his whole premise was it's harder to kill the closer you are in proximity. And I said, I think that drones are changing the paradigm because you have people that are physically removed by thousands of miles, but cognitively they're watching things in high definition and they're following people for a really long period of time. And then they're going home at the end of the day. And I said, we got to study this. And I want to call it On Killing Remotely. And he wrote back and said, Phelps, that's a great idea. I love the book. I love the title. Because if you're willing to do like 99% of the work, then we can collaborate on it. And I said, that sounds fantastic. And then I was kind of like the dog that caught the car. I said, okay, what next? And he mentored me through that entire process and said, do as many first person interviews as you can, read everything that's been published on it, and you'll know when it's time for you to start putting pen to paper. And that's what I did. It took about 9 months of research and interviews, and they all started to sound the same. And I said, all right, I'm ready to start writing. So I sat down and I wrote every day for almost a year. And then I had a manuscript at the end. But it just took a lot of discipline. Some days I didn't want to write, but some days it'd be 15 minutes, other days it'd be 4 hours. But by the time I was done, I had a manuscript. I gave it to his agent in New York City, and he looked at it and said, give me a couple weeks, and then I'll get back to you if I want to represent you. 2 days later, he came back. He said, I finished the book. I'm ready to start pitching it to publishing houses.
Wow, that's quick.
Yeah, it was quick. So he really liked it.
Like what he saw.
Yeah, he liked it. He ended up pitching it to Little Brown and Company, which is also the publisher that published On Killing. So I liked the continuity there. And they sat on it for a while, and this was right around the time that COVID was starting to emerge. So things are disrupting all sorts of industries, including publishing. And then you probably remember this. We had a drone strike. I want to say it was in January of 2021, or no, it was when was that? January of 20, where we killed Qassam Soleimani.
Yeah.
In Iraq. So he was the Iranian Republican Guard Corps,
Leader. Yeah.
leader. We killed him with a drone strike, and then it was in the news. My agent reached back out to the publisher and said, "Hey, you have a book on drones sitting on your shelf right now. You gonna buy this or not?" So they acquired the manuscript, and then I spent the next year and a half going through editing and finally published it. So.
That is awesome. And this whole time, though, you were working full time too. You never became a full time author, at least at that point in time, right?
Yeah, I was still working full time.
Yeah,
I was working full time and working nights and weekends on writing. So
got it. Whew, that's good discipline. Good on you for sure. And then so did you once the book? What was that like? I mean, it's a fascinating thing to be published. It's got to be rewarding. I mean, what then? What do you go? I always feel like go on tour. Do you go to the bookshop? Do you do what happens next?
Yeah. I mean, it was published in June of 2021, so it was right in the heart of COVID, and nobody was doing book tours. I did several interviews on NPR and things like that. Other written interviews, Washington Post, Daily Beast, things like that, which I thought were really interesting. I was on C-SPAN at some point, which was I wasn't ready for that. Like nothing trains you to be prepared to talk about your book. So that was a steep learning curve for me. The other part that I wasn't really prepared for was kind of the outpouring of support from the community. The folks that read it and said, you put into words what I've been feeling and couldn't quite articulate. So it was very helpful. I got to become an advocate for, mental health particularly for, the Air Force and their RPA pilots and community and stuff. I've been a guest speaker down at the 558th, training squadron in San Antonio, which is part of the Air Force's pipeline. I've been down there several times to talk to the Marines and airmen. So, it's interesting the opportunities that it opens up. And somebody when I was getting ready to publish, it was an Air Force counselor. She asked me, "What are you going to do with this once this is released and published? How are you going to use this to affect change?" And, another thing that I wasn't prepared for, I said, I just want to publish a book. I want to be an author. I hadn't thought about that. So required me to think a little bit more of, how can I use this new voice that I've been given to help impact change? And, so I tried to, as much as I could, whenever there was regulations or, things that didn't make sense, I'd reach out to senior leaders within the VA or within the DoD and say, "Hey, can you look into this, please? Like the warfare has changed, but the regulations and things that govern how we decide if someone rates PTSD as or combat related compensation, those things hadn't quite caught up yet." So we're still going through a lot of work on that. But
No, that's fascinating. And again, obviously, it is a massive change. For me, I certainly feel like I have made hiring veterans my vocation. I mean, I did it at Amazon as kind of a job. I mean, it was my job, but it was great. But now it's like something I choose to do and find ways to give back, and working with the military veteran and working with offline, doing that. Certainly, and working with a bunch of nonprofits and mentoring and helping, any time of transitioning veteran. That's kind of my main thing. I think you're certainly a niche that you focused on, but something that is new and just going to be growing. I mean, I think that's the thing. It's like people don't know the impacts that this is going to have and continue to have. To me, I have this like Ender's Game in my head of like, what does it look like when warfare becomes completely remote, in the impact of it becoming a game and not like there's something there. I mean, I don't know, but I think you're on the very cutting edge of that, or that discussion of that. It's fascinating, I think.
yeah, I think the introduction of artificial intelligence, automated target recognition, autonomy, along a scale, I think is going to be the next evolution of drone warfare or robotics. It's already happening to some extent, but it's only going to accelerate. And I think you'll start to see the human more removed from the entire process. Hopefully, not entirely removed, because I think that war is still a human endeavor, and I think humans need to be involved, particularly when it comes to the decision to take another human life. I think that we need to keep humans, somewhere in the kill chain,
Yeah.
rather than just having killer robots out there making decisions for us. So it'll be interesting to see where the technology leads us in the next decade.
No doubt. No, it is changing fast. I mean, you watched the Ukraine and even being down here in Tampa, being at Soft Week last week, and seeing the technology and the evolution of it it's fascinating. What's there hasn't been implemented yet, but at least the concepts are there for that next generation. I think it's going to be a whole different world for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you are obviously get, engage, or people reach out to you about this concept and the impact it's having on the soldiers, airmen, Marines that are, utilizing this technology. I mean, do you have any kind of personal foundations, or where's your give back place? I mean, the book itself is a give back in some ways, but how do you stay connected?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say I'm more of a connector than somebody that has formed his own foundation for this kind of support. So, through publishing a book, I connected with a lot of people within the community, and then some people. In fact, just recently, there's an Air Force sensor operator who's formed a foundation that is focused on providing toolkits for mental health evaluation and support to the VA. And he reached out to me and said, "Hey, are you interested in helping me? And can you connect me with folks?" And so that's how I've been trying to give back to the community, is just being a resource that can connect people that are looking for other resources to help them. So, and I'm also
Yeah.
I've also become an advisor for a startup as well that's working in the UAS space. So
Very cool. No, I don't know if have you ever met or do you know Andy Christian perchance?
I don't think I do.
Andy's in the drone space these days. He was in electronic vehicles. Now he's doing drone stuff. Hive, who's for Hive? I don't know. I can talk about that offline. But interesting. A lot of military guys, and he was a recon guy now in the drone space as well. And just interesting where a lot of that is heading. I think merging a lot of different technologies, with drones being kind of at the epicenter of it, because a lot of different subsets of it. But interesting for sure. Again, I want people to, I was on Killing Remotely. You have it. Is it available for sale online? Is it Audible? Is it out there everywhere? How do people get it? If they're interested in learning more about this, because I think it is very topical and not well written about, at least that I'm aware of. So I think it's a very, very topical book.
Yeah, you can find it on Amazon. There's an Audible version. I did not do recording, so I spared everyone from that. It's professionally done. Um, I think the coolest thing was when it was first published, it was in like Barnes and Noble, and I could go to my local mall and see it sitting on the shelf. And that was just super rewarding. And I'd go down there every week, and my wife's like, "You're a nerd."
Still there. Maybe it's bad thing. Maybe you sold out. Maybe you want it gone because they have to buy new ones,
Yeah, but it's kind of 4 years removed at this point, so it's
Yeah.
it's not it's hard to find on shelves, but you can still get it through Amazon.
Got it. Now, any other books up your sleeve? What's next? What's the next chapter for?
Yeah. So I wrote another book. Actually, during COVID, I sat down and kind of used the same discipline process, and I wanted to get into fiction. So I wrote a young adult dystopian novel and finished the whole manuscript and sent it to my agent. And he said, "No, I don't think this is that good. So I'm not going to take it to publishers." And he said, next time, just don't write a whole book before you come to me. He's like, "You're a publisher now. You don't have to do that." And I'm probably about 2/3 of the way through a fiction book. It's actually a futuristic book about a drone pilot, and kind of some things that he goes through. So yeah, I still write. It's still my hobby.
Yeah.
Hope one day to turn it into my full-time career. But
I love it. I love it. Well, as we kind of get ready to wrap up, I mean, any save rounds or parting wisdom for whether it's a transitioning veteran, someone that wants to be an author? I mean, anything that you've been through that you wish you knew, 10 years ago before you got into this kind of world?
everybody says plan your transition a year or two in advance. And I've seen people that have done that and they've done well. Like they have a plan, they know where they're going, they know what they want to do. I was ill prepared for transition, and it probably took me longer to transition into the civilian world than it should have. Right, I was still hanging on to the Marine Corps, and I was comparing. That was my standard of comparison for everything that happened in the civilian world, and it took me quite a while, I think, before I finally realized that I'm fully transitioned at this point and embraced it. So the best thing I could offer is, people always ask me, what should I do next? And I said, well, you find your next adventure at the intersection of what you're good at, what you're passionate about, and what someone will pay you to do. Right? The intersection of those three things, if you can, fit it in the middle, then I think you're going to be happy and successful. So.
No, that's great advice. Easier said than done. And I think a lot of times you have to take 2 out of 3 for a while before you can move into the third, where somebody will pay you to do what you want to do. And I think, certainly for me, you have to get the experience and see more of it because you don't know what you don't know. I mean, I think that's part of it is you kind of have to get out there and just figure it out. You have an idea of what you want to do, but, it's until you kind of get out there and live it. You have to adjust the realities of what's going on. And, and again, I said, when I got out, my oldest had just finished her freshman year of high school. And that was really the main reason we did it, and there's different economic requirements that are present at that time. Now it's a little different when I'm in this phase of life, and you have a little more flexibility to really let your passion be your passion, I think, but kind of nice, but no complaints there for sure. Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much for the time today. I learned a ton. I'm excited about the book. I have not read it, but I'm going to read it. It's a fascinating topic. And again, I think it's something that you're probably ahead of the curve for sure on that. I think, again, just seeing what's going on in Ukraine, seeing just the defense sector, and again, being down at Suffolk 2 weeks ago and what the future is on this drone thing. And people have not understood the impact to the operators and what that looks like, because it's coming, and it's going to be coming in a big way and pretty darn fast, I think, based on what I'm seeing out there. So, man, thanks for leaning on that one and getting ahead of it. And I wish you the best of luck moving forward.
All right. Thanks, Beau. Great conversation. Really enjoyed it.
Appreciate it. All right. Out here.